Welcome to ITS Washington's webinar, Equitable Planning and TSMO. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Lisa Ballard. I'm an integration planner for WSDOT's Regional Transit Coordination Division, and I'm also the Vice President of ITS Washington. Before we begin, I'd like to thank the ITS Washington Quarterly Events Committee for organizing this event. And we'd also like to remind you that we have a planned picnic this evening at 6 p.m. at Luther Burbank Park in Mercer Island. If you would like to attend and haven't RSVP'd, I'll put my email in the chat and you can email me as soon as possible so that we make sure we have enough food. As you know, this webinar will share examples from Washington and Oregon, illustrating how Transportation Systems Management and Operations, or TSMO, has extended beyond freeway management to encompass all modes and all people. We have examples from WSDOT, Oregon Metro, which is Portland's MPO, and Lane County, Oregon. An important reminder for today's webinar. On the bottom of the screen, you will see a Q&A button, a session Q&A button. Please post all your questions here. We will answer them at the conclusion of the presentations during our panel discussions. We have three presentations today from 4 speakers. We will hear from Pamela Vasudeva, then we'll hear from Caleb Winter from Oregon Metro, Chris Gergich from Fair and Peers, and then finally Kelly Smith from DKS. I will refrain from sharing their bios since you can find them on the ITS Washington event webpage. So first up is Pamela Vasudeva from Washington State DOT.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you for joining us today. I'm here. This conversation is about equity, but we're pretty early in our TSMO program plan. So I'm going to talk more broadly about how we are in the direction we are moving at WSDOT with TSMO, and then we'll get into more details with Chris and Caleb and Kelly to talk about how TSMO and equity align. So with that, at WSDOT, Transportation System Management and Operation Strategies, or TSMO, isn't a new way of solving transportation challenges. However, until now, WSDOT didn't have a formalized process to lead with TSMO strategies in advance or alongside capital expansion. Over the last year and a half, WSDOT worked across divisional silos, such as freight, multimodal, active transportation, and more, and WSDOT's 6 regional offices to define what and how to use TSMO as a tool to improve safety and efficiency of our multimodal transportation system across the state, which includes rural, suburban, and urban parts of the state. We established a council of over 40 members, including representation from 2 regional metropolitan organizations, to collaboratively develop the TSMO program plan, defining TSMO at WSDOT. Defining TSMO is the first phase in strategizing how to use TSMO solutions in problem solving our multimodal transportation challenges throughout the project delivery process. The plan identifies the business case for TSMO, defines TSMO from a multimodal lens, provides a set of goals and values to align with our strategic plan, and identifies a set of actions to lead with TSMO solutions to preserve and maintain and optimize system performance. So what is TSMO? At WSDOT, we've defined TSMO to stand for transportation, as mentioned, it is Transportation System Management Operations. At WSDOT, we've defined TSMO to be a set of cost-effective strategies that prioritize the safety, operations, and reliability of the multimodal transportation system to meet both existing and future transportation needs. To align with WSDOT's strategic plan, our team developed a vision, mission, values, and goal statements that reflects the TSMO brand. The vision is for people and goods in Washington to get where they need to go safely and efficiently, with a mission to optimize how WSDOT and its partners use resources to realize the multimodal transportation system's greatest potential through solutions that value safety by helping achieve target zero values, sustainability by improving energy efficiency, reducing pollution, and enhancing resiliency. Equity by creating equitable access to reliable and affordable transportation options. Performance by balancing priorities of safety, efficiency, and reliability to increase multimodal mobility. TSMO strategies and solutions can be used to advance equitable access to reliable and affordable transportation options. It accomplishes this by identifying and addressing urgent safety, access, and reliability needs throughout our state to support the community and to support community needs. TSMO can be implemented during any stage of the project lifecycle and can be applied as a standalone project or can be integrated into or to defer capital projects. These projects can be delivered in-house as a subscription service or through a partnership with other agencies. TSMO strategies include planning and policy development, multimodal transportation management, intelligent transportation systems, smart mobility options, and transportation demand management. So why do we need TSMO? The business case is based on the premise that traditional revenues that have funded transportation systems are changing and may result in a shortfall to continue business as usual. By applying cost-effective solutions, WSDOT is able to direct more funds towards preservation and maintenance of the billions of investments already made on our transportation system. Flexible funding for context-sensitive solutions at various stages of planning and design can lead to better transportation system performance. WSDOT's shift towards a more diverse workforce is required to fully realize the capabilities of using 21st century tools to improve system operations and efficiency. And TSMO strategies offer uniquely effective improvements in addressing congestion and resolving safety issues. As we were working through the defining TSMO, we were fortunate to have a lot of enthusiasm within WSDOT to get moving. So during this 1.5 years, we have some early wins to help advance TSMO's maturity in our agency. Some of these include we developed training videos for our workforce that can be used both internal and external to WSDOT to learn more about TSMO and how to apply TSMO. We updated our design manual to introduce TSMO as a solution and provided TSMO examples. We conducted a capability maturity model to assess regional maturity within Eastern, Southwest, and South Central regions, their maturity on how they are looking at and using TSMO solutions. We're developing a capability maturity framework tool that will be used to evaluate the relationship between TSMO and land use. We added TSMO strategies and solutions within our highway system plan update. And we developed 3 return on investment summaries that showcase the benefits of using TSMO in the Eastern region. Next, I'd just like to give you an example of one of the return on investments that we worked on with DKS. What you see on the screen is the interchange of US 195 and I-90 in Eastern Washington. This interchange had high crash rates reported due to a short distance to merge onto I-90 from US 195. Extending the length of the on-ramp was cost prohibitive due to a nearby creek and existing bridges on US 195. In 2019, WSDOT installed a ramp meter onto I-90 to address the crashes at the merge to help the flow of traffic onto I-90 from US 195. The improvement increased the gap time between vehicles merging onto the freeway and as a result reduced the likelihood of merging traffic collisions. The outcome was that we saw significant improvement in safety with more reliable travel times through the interchange and a reduction in crashes at the merge. So with that, I just would like to give you a reference of where we're at. We, through the planning process of integrating TSMO into WSDOT, we have defined what TSMO what a multimodal TSMO vision means at WSDOT. And now we're moving on to the second and third phases, which is more of the programmatic and tactical pieces. In this next year, we'll be working on integrating TSMO into our agency, which embarks on some of the project planning and delivery processes. And then we'll go into the tactical piece of educating staff to lead with TSMO solutions to solve our 21st century challenges. So next steps, integrating TSMO will expand on how we message and communicate the why TSMO is important to both internal and external partners, including developing business cases for different audiences, providing educational materials about how and why to use TSMO throughout the project lifecycle, and integrating TSMO into existing policies, plans, and bodies of work. We're updating our training resources, such as the TSMO website that hosts a set of TSMO solutions to be considered based on needs, location, and improvements. We're developing an executive order that directs WSDOT staff, senior management, and executives to lead with TSMO strategies and solutions before or alongside roadway expansion. And we're doing outreach with both internal and external partners to identify ways to collaboratively lead with TSMO solutions. Thank you.
Great. It looks like Chris and I are next. Thanks, Chris, for putting the slides up. My name is Caleb Winter. I'm a senior transportation planner with Metro in the Portland, Oregon region, and managing the Transportation System Management and Operations program, as Pamela just described, is very similar. And I'm grateful to Chris today for proposing we present at ITS Washington. Chris, do you want a short introduction now?
Sure, yeah, my name's Chris Gergich. I'm an associate traffic engineer with Fair and Peers in our Seattle office. I'm the project manager for the strategy update. It's been a real pleasure getting to work with Caleb on this, and I'm really excited to show you all our progress so far.
Great. So Pamela described TSMO very well. So this is just a high level that TSMO is, all of us being a better steward of the transportation system, doing more with less by managing and operating more efficiently as our first priority. And we practice TSMO when we take a holistic systems approach, develop a broad set of strategies needed in our regions, and strive to innovate and prioritize cost-effective solutions. So TSMO aligns with Portland's regional policy that we need a transportation management strategy rather than believing somehow we can build our way out of congestion. Next slide. So in 2010, Metro developed our region's first TSMO strategy. So we're updating this one. And what's happened in between? In 2016, Metro as an agency adopted our agency-wide policy, the Strategic Plan to Advance Racial Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, which led to community-focused work in developing the 2018 Regional Transportation Plan, so our long-range plan, and generated just about a dozen goals you see here. The community prioritized the ones you see in gold. Equitable transportation is now a core focus and is supported in the decision-making for how projects are evaluated for funding. And TSMO fits in as one strategy among that big regional transportation plan. Next slide, please. So backing up, the 2018 RTP, after that funding was based on sort of geographically established equity. This map shows the shades of purple there, equity focus areas. And those include people of color, people with limited English proficiency, and people with lower incomes as one place to prioritize funding and have a discussion that incorporated equity. But really what I'm getting at is the policy changed, and for us to follow the RTP with our TSMO strategy update, we needed to follow this established community prioritized policy direction in our region. Next slide, Chris. Thanks. So we've had 10 years of TSMO progress. We're reframing how we build equity into that strategy. 10 years back, our vision statement did include equity, but other than a few suggested projects, equity was not carried throughout the goals and proposed actions. So beginning our planning this year, we incorporated a broader, more diverse set of voices on our stakeholder advisory committee and in stakeholder surveys and workshops. Also from the beginning, our first task was to establish an equity focus, and we did that in partnership with Fair and Peers. We looked back at TSMO goals established in 2010 for safety, reliability, traveler information, and quality of life. Those were our 4 goals. And while these goals are still important today, equity planning acknowledges how far we are from sharing the same quality of life, as disproportionate impacts persist and we directly or inadvertently recreate those systems. And national statistics underscore why equity is important. For example, households in the lower income bracket spend twice as much of their income on transportation than households in the top income bracket each year. Nearly a quarter of African-American households live without a car, are multiple times more likely to rely on transit, and are impacted significantly more when comparing fatality rates for pedestrians. So the 10-year planning horizon gives us, for this update, gives us a chance on a path to reverse disproportionate results. A very simplified way to reframe is taking the need like Interstate 5 is congested and reframing it that people of color are disproportionately impacted by congestion on Interstate 5. So with that reframing, we'll work with stakeholders on a TSMO approach that works for everyone. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, on the left, you see a quote. So that's right out of Metro's 2016 DEI policy that by addressing the barriers experienced by people of color in our region, we will effectively also identify solutions and remove barriers to other disadvantaged groups. So that helped us put a racial equity focus into our TSMO conversations as we drafted the strategy. So we developed questions throughout this one-page document of an equity tree. Took it quite literally, there's the tree. This creates a method we can easily return to at different stages. We did in our planning process and then right on into implementation and thinking about what we fund and what these projects really are. So the equity tree starts at the roots, and Chris is gonna click and hopefully we'll kind of scroll through just briefly. We'll share the link to get to this at the end, but there we are at the roots for context, transportation choices, and who is voicing the problem relating to impacts, including disparities and inequities. Then we're better prepared to start defining the problem, leading to an understanding of who, what, and where before we're taking steps towards a solution. Then in this middle section, questions are asked on inclusivity in TSMO for professionals, both TSMO agency leaders and workforce in their, are they representing diversity of and values of our region? On the right are questions about data. Do we have the data needed to understand or measure equity? Is there a gap? And will the TSMO solution we propose help collect the data, fill in that gap? And then here at the top, once we define steps towards a solution, we're better prepared for implementing. We can evaluate and we have to be accountable to the results. So does the solution create, reinforce, or remove barriers to travel for Black, Indigenous, and people of color and people with lower incomes? To be accountable, we need to ask, did we help or have we had unintended consequences in what we implemented despite our best efforts? And what do we do to recover from that? So that's the quick tour of the equity tree. We'll share the website later, but Chris is going to head into the planning process that then stemmed from this equity focus.
Yeah, thanks, Caleb. So the question then becomes, how did that equity tree tool shape the development of our new TSMO strategy? So the strategy starts with a vision statement and then moves on through goals and objectives for those goals. And to make this an actionable strategy with measurable outcomes and so that we can track our progress towards achieving those goals, the strategy also includes performance measures, targets, and action plans. So starting at the very beginning with the vision statement, shown here on the bottom of the slide, we held several stakeholder workshops working towards crafting a vision and goals. And we used the equity tree to focus that conversation on both what we wanted to achieve and who was most affected by the types of problems we had identified that TSMO could solve. So as you can see, the final version of the statement starts with more of the traditional outcomes found in a TSMO strategy, reliability, agility, connectedness, but then goes on to explicitly call out one of TSMO's key goals is to eliminate disparities experienced by Black, Indigenous, and people of color and people with lower incomes. So moving on to the goals, we came up with 6 goals with the group. Again, feedback from the diverse stakeholder group and a project management team. You can see these 6 goals incorporate regional policy outcomes that Caleb previously discussed, and some of these goals reflect more traditional TSMO values of safety and collaboration, reliability, and connectivity. In particular, the goal eliminate disparities focuses on equitable TSMO strategies and actions. It calls out specifically that we want to use TSMO to further transportation equity in the region, and the group didn't stop there. Equity is also woven into objectives and thinking for all 6 of the goals. For example, in the goal Prepare for Change, we wanted to call out the need for agility in the system. While we've all felt the effects of the disruptions of the last 2 years, the group wanted this TSMO strategy not only to include growth, disruption from changing technologies, but we also understand some of the civil unrest and furthering social justice. So under connected and reliable travel choices, we specify that all people need reliable connections and goods and services. And then, of course, for the goal, keep everyone from harm, we wanted to make sure this incorporates the traditional Vision Zero practices, but we expanded it to understand, to our understanding of safety to include the harm that comes from experiences of our residents have shared traveling at night, or not feeling comfortable riding transit, or waiting for a bus, or hearing racist or sexist remarks while walking. We are asking the region's planners, engineers, and operators, what are the specific ways we can manage the transportation system that keep everyone free from harm, not just bodily harm, but ensuring a sense of safety and comfort while traveling? So let's dig into the eliminate disparities goal a little further, focusing in on the objectives for the goal to eliminate disparities. The first objective still focuses on those key TSMO strategies to provide traveler information, but rather than thinking about simply what information, where it's shared, when it's communicated, and how, i.e. what technology is being used, the focus shift to who is being reached and how TSMO can remove barriers to accessing the information. Does someone need a smartphone or a bank account to access the information or a specific travel mode? Should information be provided in multiple languages or in a new or different location to reach communities that are not currently being reached? To eliminate disparities, we really needed to identify them. So the other objectives in this goal really focus in on how we can first identify past and existing disparities and how the transportation system has been planned and experienced. And then how TSMO strategies can correct those disparities so that all people can comfortably and easily travel the region. All right, our next step was developing our performance measures. These measure the effect of our TSMO strategy and actions, allowing the region to track their progress and show growth through the life of the plan. With much discussion and feedback, we came to this list of 7 overarching measures. These performance measures are broad measurements for the transportation system. We kept the list focused to make sure it was achievable for Metro, as well as easily tracked. But each measure is further described with key performance indicators and exploratory metrics. The key indicators are those that Metro currently has the ability to track and report, while the exploratory metrics are ones that we would like to advance, but may need further research, new data sources or policies around reporting. The goal would likely be to track these as Metro is able to, and then develop the process to report them. I'd like to go over a quick example. So something we're all familiar with, the number of crashes by severity. This is a goal or a measure that furthers the goal free from harm, but also you'll see in the top right corner there, we also identified it measuring how well we're eliminating disparities and reliable travel choices. Here, the key performance indicator is a fairly standard one. It's total crashes normalized by vehicle miles traveled and per capita. But thinking through the equity tree, we asked who is most affected and what data is needed to understand the question. You'll see this resulted in calling out specifically crash demographics and risk, as well as average miles biked or walked. At this time, Metro has the ability to look at the geography of where crashes happen. This indicates that there are a disproportionate number of crashes occurring in an equity focus area. However, we also know that those living in equity focus areas often have longer commutes, walk further to transit, and have lack of adequate pedestrian and bicycle facilities. For those exploratory metrics, we specified crash demographics to determine who is being involved in crashes. There were many discussions about how this data could be collected and who would be collecting it. This led us to creating an action around researching data sources and developing the policies for processing this information. Similarly, we developed an action to measure and understand crash risk, specifically for equity focus areas, and to measure average miles walked and biked so that we can better understand the true rates of pedestrian and bicycle related collisions normalized by the act of transportation instead of vehicle miles traveled. This is one example, but we used an equity lens to think about all 7 of these performance measures, worked with our local technical group and the management team to really think through how to weave this measure or weave equity through all of these measures. And then here again, you see the equity tree on the right. If you remember, the tree has the different levels of actions, strategies, and plans. And a series of actions were developed for each objective. We soon found that this resulted in way too many separate actions to track and account for, and there were a lot of redundancies. The team worked to group those actions into similar themes, and then it started to become very clear that those actions could be sorted into packages. Unintentionally, I wish I could claim the intention for it, honestly, those packages closely mirrored the equity tree. There are several actions that fall under the planning umbrella to get a better understanding of who, what, and where of who, what, and where. And then additionally, we have several actions that develop infrastructure and capabilities through a series of related steps to develop solutions. Lastly, we identified a number of actions that evaluate our progress and hold the region accountable by creating an opportunity to listen to the community's impact. Let me show you some examples. Oh no, there we go. That's better. So under planning, we identified a need to develop a regional strategy that and policy around MOD. This will start by developing, mobility on demand, or MOD. This will start by developing a working group that brings in voices from agencies, private partners, and community-based organizations. Additionally, the action includes things like establishing benchmarks for equity focus areas, developing methods for communicating these options to travelers, and development of a unified payment that includes MOD services in transit. As an example of our concepts, capabilities, and infrastructure actions, consider how to better deploy regional traveler information systems in an equitable way, starting with BIPOC, low income, and limited English proficiency communities. One of the specific outcomes this action identified was to evaluate a method for deploying traveler information in a way that does not require personal smart technology, such as screens in public buildings or major destinations in regional centers. And as an example of our listening and accountability action items, the group identified a need to create a community listening program. This was rooted in what we heard very early in our stakeholder engagement. A lot of us are doing the work, don't share the same life experiences as those using the system. The idea here was to create a pilot program that gives the community more access to those that make the decisions in the system, lets them tell us what they experience and compensates them for it. The idea that came out for this, this came out of included creating a lunch and learn style of program where community members can meet the engineers and planners in their offices and share some stories. So we're excited to be finishing up this plan, and we expect to have a public comment draft available for review by the end of the month. I really appreciate this group's continued interest in TSMO and what we can accomplish together through it in ITS. And then I wanted to give Caleb a chance to just close us out.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I wanted to just offer resources I turn to often learning about TSMO, and these are probably ones going into the Washington plan, but National Operations Center of Excellence is a great one, transportationops.org. U.S. Department of Transportation has been really helpful with a lot of seminars and workshops. And then the interesting one is a sort of intersection at the Intelligent Transportation Systems Joint Program Office that brings a lot of, what we're just talking about with mobility on demand. They've been supporting some of the initiatives and innovative things that give more people access, even like indoor navigation, which is just fascinating. And then at a research level, TRB, Transportation Research Board, has a committee for regional TSMO, and that's ACP 10. You go to mytrb.org and you can sign up to become a friend, and I can put some of those links in later. Next slide, Chris. It's just to thank you everyone for attending today. The website for Metro is there at the bottom. If you just do oregonmetro.gov/TSMO, you'll get to our page and click on equity. We've put the equity tree on that page, and we'll be putting more documents as we wrap up this strategy. So thanks everyone.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Kelly Smith. I'm with DKS Associates, and I'm going to pull up my slides here in a second. Thanks to Caleb, Chris, and Pam for the great presentations to start us off today. I really enjoyed listening to it, and I definitely learned a few things. Today, I'm going to talk about the Central Lane Metropolitan Area Regional Transportation Plan and ITS Plan. And I want to state up front that I'm presenting on this today, but I want to thank my teammates both at the Lane Council of Governments and internally at DKS for helping with this project. It was a great team effort, and we're still working on it, but it was a really great experience to go through this. So just an overview of what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about the planning effort that we conducted in Central Lane County. I'll explain kind of why this project approach is so important. I'll give a sample of the equity analysis that we completed, and then kind of the highlight of my presentation is the lessons learned that we had from this project. So an overview of this planning effort. We at DKS worked with the Lane Council of Governments to develop these 3 plans. And if you're unfamiliar with Central Lane MPO area, it's the Eugene Springfield region, just south of Portland, about 2 hours, home to the University of Oregon. So we worked with the MPO there to develop the following 3 plans in concurrency with each other. So the Intelligent Transportation Systems Plan, the Regional Transportation Plan, and then the Congestion Management Plan. And this was unique because typically the second 2 plans that I have listed on the screen are done separately from the ITS plan. And so combining the 2 really gave us a unique opportunity to explore what types of projects best achieve regional goals related to mobility, accessibility, and safety. And it also allowed us to consider how ITS and TSMO can be implemented to improve equity in the region. So what we found, and I'm sure what you've learned from the other presentations in this webinar, is that TSMO and ITS, which falls, of course, under the umbrella of TSMO, is a really effective way to achieve transportation equity. And so through this planning effort, we were able to consider ITS and TSMO solutions that really focused on investing in the maintenance and operations of the existing transportation network and putting that into a long-range planning process. Doing so allowed us to come up with an ideal set of steps to implement TSMO in a long-range planning process. So I have the steps listed on this slide. Typically, a regional transportation plan identifies the mobility, accessibility, and safety issues of a geographic area with an equity lens, which arguably should be applied to every planning process. Projects and programs are prioritized and implemented based on the feedback of historically excluded communities. And then within this framework of developing the 3 plans concurrently, we believe that we can achieve equity by using ITS and TSMO strategies to make mobility, accessibility, and safety improvements within the existing right-of-way, often for a low cost and in the near term. So for example, even if you completed steps 1 and 2 of the process on the slide and you prioritize the needs of historically excluded communities in the planning process, if you still choose a solution that increases the width of the roadway, you're taking away from the space and the place these communities are a part of. And ITS and TSMO focuses on policies and programs and infrastructure that work within the existing right-of-way. And they also promote flexible, collaborative solutions that can be adapted for the needs of a community. Just a few examples of that are travel demand management, TDM, improving bike, pedestrian, transit infrastructure and access, providing better traveler information, and even installing broadband to serve like the schooling and employment needs of a community. Rather than when you're widening a roadway, you're doing something very similar to what the interstates did when they ripped through communities in the first place. So for that reason, we feel that ITS and TSMO has the potential to do a great job of improving equity in certain areas. So that's the ideal process that you would go through. But I'll now talk about kind of what we did in this project. So what we did is we conducted an equity analysis that focused on the region's Title VI plan designations. And that's what you see in the map on the left of this slide. It geographically shows how Title VI classifications of historically excluded communities exist in the region, which are communities of color, households in poverty, the elderly populations, and people with disabilities. And I think Caleb talked about a similar map for the metro region as well. The map on the right shows the 6 census tracts that we focused on that actually had the highest concentrations of the historically excluded communities relative to this region. To understand, we focused on these areas to understand the impact of the proposed projects in the regional transportation plan. So as just a sample of the equity analysis that we did a travel pattern analysis for these census tracts, and I'll focus specifically for the purposes of this presentation on one census tract in East Springfield, where the percent of the population that were elderly was the highest in all of the region, where 50% of the population in that census tract were considered elderly. So we compared the travel patterns in that neighborhood to the patterns in an adjacent larger neighborhood, and then kind of a sub neighborhood inside of that larger neighborhood, which we'll refer to as Thurston neighborhood. So what we found was that travel patterns in the morning were quite different from between the census tracts with the higher percentage of elderly populations, which is this bottom bar here. And then in the evening peak hours, it was actually very similar to the other neighborhoods that we looked at. And after bringing these results to our community stakeholders, we theorized that this might have been because elderly populations are traveling longer to receive medical care, whereas other people are maybe on the more traditional commuting hours or dropping their kids off at school. So there may be an issue of peak spreading. And so this travel pattern analysis was really interesting to incorporate into the performance measures of the rest of the plan when we looked at things like access to transit. So this infographic is showing we measured among those 6 census tracts that had the highest percentages of historically excluded communities. We compared how many of those households were within a quarter mile of a transit stop, and we looked at that compared to the overall region. And so you can see that the equity-focused census tracts are within a quarter mile of a transit stop. But the question that kind of came up from combining the travel pattern analysis and this traditional performance measure is, what about high capacity transit? Are people taking longer trips because they have to take a longer bus route? Perhaps a better performance measure to understand equity and something that we could improve on with an ITS or TSMO solution is access to high capacity transit. So lessons learned that I'll kind of wrap up with here is that we've just looked at those 6 census tracts for our equity analysis, and we came to the conclusion that that was really kind of a sensitivity analysis. By grouping all of the historically excluded communities that are designated in Title VI together, we're kind of minimizing the individual needs of each of those groups. And so to complete a full equity analysis, we want to understand not just where the highest concentrations are, but where everyone who has been excluded from planning processes and not served by transportation appropriately, what their needs are across the region, not just in those areas. Another lesson learned is what other groups of people should we be considering? We just focused on the Title VI communities, But when you're looking at, for example, low income, does that include people who are houseless? Are they included in the census data? Questions like that are really important to ask, especially when you go to the community and they have their own needs that may be separate from the data that we had. And I think Chris and Caleb talked a little bit about that as well. The thing that I'll close with is that ITS helps us address the issues of the transportation system now. It's really interesting for me to look at a long-range planning process, given our experiences over the last, I guess, 1.5 or 2 years with the pandemic. We really don't know what the world is going to look like and what people's needs are going to be in 40 years or 20 years. And so I think that ITS and TSMO have great potential to solve problems today and set us up for the future in terms of ensuring that communities have access to broadband and expanding data collection beyond the traditional measures so that we can understand where people are traveling and also be able to couple that with really robust community engagement. So yeah, thanks again for having me at this presentation. Again, I'm really grateful to be a part of this panel of experts here. And I think next is questions. Is that right, Lisa?
Yep. Thank you so much to Pamela, Caleb, Chris, and Kelly. So for everybody in the audience, just a reminder, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So please plop some questions into there. But I am going to get us started. For Kelly, Caleb, and Chris, what tools and data sources are you using or do you plan to use?
Good question. I wanted to start out saying that equity tree originally I thought was going to have more logic built into it, more yes and no answers as we worked through equity in it. And it just isn't the conversation. It is questions that we have to address on our way through. So there isn't like a data source that takes us through that. But what we recognized in that part of looking at equity, like I said, there are gaps. And we also, I think one of our values is to not necessarily just look at that equity focus area geography and really hear voices about where people need to travel and work with those. So if we have data on origin to destination, that would be one of our best data sources. And I know Metro, my other colleagues have looked into what some of the commercially available sources are, and we haven't found one that gets to the demographics that we would need to put that into use. But that's definitely something over the life of 10 years. I hope we can make more decisions based on that. But the other tool that's recommended in there is a context or a connectivity index. And so looking at how far you can go by various mode with reliability, but also putting in community voice barriers that restrict, time of day or other safety issues, whatever it is. So we have a more realistic view of how people can actually travel from where they are.
And I'll just add on to that a little bit. I think we coordinated a lot with the safety section at Metro, and we have an action to build like a TSMO toolbox specifically for safety improvements and TSMO related solutions around safety. And then I think, the connectivity index. And we also are talking about making a VMT tool. Vehicle miles traveled is one of our metrics, but we wanted to look at it specifically in exposure versus generated. So if a different census block is exposed to more VMT than they're generating, that could be an alarming thing to look at and be able to track and understand some of the disparities again. So taking one of those familiar metrics and really understanding what an equity lens would look like.
And go ahead, Kelly.
Maybe. Oh, I was just going to add for the travel pattern analysis, just specifically what I included in my presentation, we use streetlight data, RIDIS, and then the regional travel model, which was recently updated as part of our regional transportation planning process. And I think related to what Caleb and Chris are saying, I think the streetlight data and pairing that with the demographic data was really probably the most important or telling when it came to trying to understand or maybe like put data behind what people were saying in the community and to see where those matched up. And I will also say with any equity process, data is just data, and we always are trying to lead with the community input first. There's always going to be gaps in data, but putting people's lived experience at the front of it is the most important.
Thank you. Pam, can you tell me what WSDOT's doing related to TSMO and equity?
Yeah, as I had mentioned, we're early in the programmatic stages, so we don't have a fancy equity tree yet, and we're trying to envision what equity means at WSDOT. What we do have is that we've identified in our values that equity is one of the 4 key values that we need to move forward with as we proceed with TSMO, with the TSMO program. We are also, we acknowledge that TSMO is a way to solve problems quickly and cost efficiently. So if there are identified problems out there, that we can use TSMO solutions to help remedy them. In addition to that, we are working on some planning studies across the state that are using TSMO, that are kind of using a TSMO planning process. And so I'm actually going to put the question back to you, Lisa, if you could share with the group what you're doing in Southwest Region on SR 503.
Okay, thanks, Pam. Yes, so we are kicking off a corridor study on SR 503 in north of Vancouver. And we are actually working with DKS on that project. And as we are putting together the scope of work from the very beginning, similar to that foundation piece that Caleb put up there, we are asking about who lives in the community, what their needs are, and what their travel patterns are. So, and we've also, as we've scoped it out, tried to incorporate these questions into our scope of work. Just starting. So that's pretty exciting work. Okay, I have another question here from somebody in attendance. How do you get the voices of people who are candidly struggling to survive day to day, paycheck to paycheck, to go to where, how are you getting those voices? Are you going to where they live and work, or perhaps using a proxy such as an advocacy organization?
Caleb, do you want to talk a little bit about Metro's work with community-based organizations?
Yeah, it goes into much more depth than what we did for TSMO. So we had a foundation coming out of the regional transportation plan with all that public outreach that developed leadership forums, inviting community leaders as well as elected leaders. And so a lot of what we, comments going into it, we had from that. We also had a ballot measure that didn't pass, but generated a lot of community support that were voices of where safety issues were, where travel needed to be improved, things that the projects we put into the bond measure reflected that. And those are some of the corridors we'll go back to because they have the most public outreach. For the TSMO effort, we did, with that equity tree, go out to community-based organizations and ask for input, and had some good conversations that really changed what's reflected on that equity tree. And we'll go back now that we're towards the end with draft actions. We'll go back and ask for more input. And we learned that we can offer compensation. It's better to offer it to the community-based organization as a contribution, as opposed to trying to work through how you pay, but we want to compensate for that time and input.
Yes, I think WSDOT's learning how to, or exploring how to do this work as well. Another question, let's see, I have a question that came in first from Joe Gregory. What have you found to be the limitation of TSMO in achieving equity goals?
That's a real curveball question there, Joe. I mean, I think there's limitations to everything. The biggest limitation that I think I've encountered is data. One of the questions or comments that I got on our objectives and metrics and actions around our eliminating disparities goal was that, boy, this seems really level 1, but then after they took a minute, kind of said, I guess that's where we are though, is still on level 1 in eliminating disparities. So it's really identifying what those disparities are and getting to an agreement on how we can really solve them. I think that with TSMO and L transportation, you can come up with a solution but you have to have, a really good definition of what the problem is. And I think right now we're in that spot where we have an idea what the problem is, and us as practitioners are still trying to really get our mind wrapped around that and find it in measurable ways that we can then correct.
Yeah, I think, our limitation is that we're working, with, ITS, we're working with operations, and we're not necessarily all the transportation services or the infrastructure that, that can connect people to where they need to go. So we have an action in there that overpromises in a way of connecting bike and ped trips. And we have a limited set, and to be developed, some of our TSMO tools in the toolbox. But we need to go out and assess, like, is there a gap between several miles of an otherwise safe and inviting bike ped facility? Is there one intersection or where it crosses the freeway, something that's, keeping people from using that facility that we can address, with lighting, signage, speeds, so that's, I guess, describing one limitation I've run into already.
Yeah, I think that is related to the next question. I'm going to put these two questions together. So how are you reevaluating our approach to make sure we're making a difference, especially when we can't have control over how much money is being spent on the different modes? And will you make or have you made operational changes that address modal inequality by making it better for walking and biking, and accepting that this may mean slightly longer drive times through a corridor? And if so, how have you presented safety improvements and other benefits to the public and incorporated the equity issues for people who don't own vehicles?
Yeah.
I'm trying to leave the other panelists an opportunity to talk. But I will just say, I don't know if you noticed in that 7 performance metrics, you did not see delay, level of service. They were just not things that we heard our stakeholders being super engaged with, not being as concerned. But connectivity of those pedestrian and bicycle facilities was a big concern. Availability of them connecting to transit was a big concern. Redundancy and bike routes was a big concern. Safety on a bus was a big concern. So those are the things that ended up actually showing up in our performance metrics. And I think in that, I'm hoping that will be the outcome overall. And honestly, we're still not quite finished. So hopefully that's the case.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, I think, some things we can support that support, traffic in a way, but are supporting our transit operations through that traffic. So we're looking at next generation transit signal priority. There's federal funding to TriMet to develop that system with City of Portland's participation. City of Portland has had, an uptick in crashes. Our region has had an uptick in fatal serious injuries. And so the response is not been through TSMO, but has been to reduce speeds and also some Oregon legislation to reduce speeds and put more ability for a city like City of Portland to take action where there's safety issues. So that's something that I think is going to create a better environment, but also very much, through traffic operations and signals, how do we change? Also just in traveler information, all the venues that put out, this is how fast you can get to your destination. We need to be partners with that kind of traveler information. And so I think those things will bring in more comfort for other modes.
So it sounds like when you're talking to the customers, travel delay is not coming up as a top concern, that access is a higher concern.
Definitely in our strategy so far, yeah.
Okay.
And I was sorry. I was
ahead.
going to add, we have not developed metric performance measures for how to evaluate TSMO success yet, but what we are doing more at the bigger level is creating this executive order that's prioritizing TSMO solutions. So making, and from a multimodal perspective, so making sure that all modes have, that are being considered as we do project improvements.
So I am going to ask a closing question, but first I'm going to answer the question, can we get copies of presenter slides? And so the recording will be available, but if you want to get I'm not sure if our presenters are able to share those presentations with the team. We could follow up with the presenters to see if they could convert those into PDFs for the people who attend. So if you want to email, I think if you get in contact with me, I guess might be the best way to do that, to see if you could get a copy of the presentations, then we could follow up with you. So the last question to close us out today, what does success look like to each of you?
Yeah, from the DOT's perspective, success is where we can have agreed upon approach of using TSMO solutions to advance our agenda. It provides cost-effective, easy to implement solutions in the near term. So for us, success is TSMO first.
I can pick up on that TSMO should be more part of more conversations. And, the public outreach challenge is also one that I realized through this process, we need to invite ourselves into corridor plans and, offer a breakout table setting that, joins TSMO solution into that corridor study. So that's one thing I'll see as success. And I definitely going in a more multimodal approach. Our past 10 years had a multimodal, approach, but it resulted in not a whole lot more systems engaged other than the transit operations, which has been a great success. But we definitely have a lot of work on innovations in mobility on demand through trip planning that TriMet's working on, and that has had federal support, but we still need to evolve that, and we have a pretty long, well-supported action in our strategy to do that. So some success is going to be kind of proving the case that a mix of all these modes is what our regional transportation system offers. I guess put it that way.
Maybe the only thing I'll add, and I think I'm thinking like really big picture, but I think success looks like solutions that are contextual to each environment that they're located in, and based, primarily in equity. And I think that that's a hot topic right now with like this this webinar is about TSMO and equity, and I think that success is continuing to keep equity at the forefront of every conversation, not just about TSMO, but in all conversations, and not have it just be a fad. And so, yeah, I am looking forward to sustaining this effort in the future. And I know that we're going to have a lot more lessons learned, and we're going to look back on what we're doing now and say, oh my gosh, I can't believe we didn't consider X, Y, and Z. But I think just continuing to improve and keeping equity and like context sensitive solutions at the forefront is what success looks like to me.
Awesome. Chris?
Yeah, I will say a success that I wasn't expecting was to see an engineer coming to one of our technical sessions and say, wow, I really need to go talk to some planners. We should really get planning involved in this effort. And those engineers starting to reach across the silos and understanding that we need to be working together to really be better stewards. And yeah, so I would say if we were to see sort of that culture change all throughout the region, that would be a huge success for me. I'd be really proud of.
That would be awesome. Well, thank you so much to all of our speakers and all of our attendees who were able to make it today. A recording of this webinar will be made available on the ITS Washington website within 2 business days. So thank you very much for joining us today.